This is Steve Durbin with Durbin Race Management, inviting you to join us at the 15th running of Land Between the Lakes Trail Rides, March 10th, 2018. And Grand Rivers, Kentucky and beautiful Land Between the Lakes. Use the discount code HRP15 to save 15% off your registration fees.
Welcome to the Heartland Running Podcast. Join Crystal, Andy, and Chandler as they explore all things running related in the Heartland and beyond.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to another edition of the Heartland Running Podcast. We are the hosts that when we have a guest, we stop, we collaborate, but we also listen. I'm Andy.
I'm Chandler.
And I'm Crystal.
And we are back with a brand new invention. And I would like to welcome a very special guest. I'm excited about this. And if you have even been around the ultra world and paid any sort of attention whatsoever, you're going to hear some big races. And there's some big performances that Ellie Greenwood has had in many of these races. And so Ellie, she ran her first ever ultra on New Year's Day 2005 and was immediately hooked on trail and ultra running, and has managed to make it to the finish line of over 50 ultras and marathons to date, supported by several sponsors including Salomon and Cliff Bar. Ellie balances her own training and racing with coaching runners of all abilities online for Charmin Ultra. She is a two-time Western State champion and set the course record in 2012. A two-time IAU 100K World Championships winner, and to top it off, she's also a Comrades Marathon champion. Besides Western States, she is also the course record holder for the JFK 50 miler and the Canadian Death Race, Knee Knacker, and Run for the Toad 50K. Wow, that is quite a resume. Ellie, welcome very much to the podcast.
Thanks for having me. I'm excited to be on the show.
Oh, we are excited to have you. This is awesome. We're going to start right off. And of course, the question is always, how did you get into running? And kind of some of the stuff that I've heard and read is that when you started doing some races before you got into the ultras, that it really just kind of seemed that you jumped into things just kind of on a whim with little or no training. Is all of that true?
Yeah, pretty much. I'm definitely not someone, I was always very into sports at school, like growing up as a kid in the UK. But it was much more about participation. And so I played like a bit of field hockey, and we would do a bit of track and field, and we played this weird British sport called netball that nobody over here knows about. And so it was all about participation, but not real competition. And we definitely didn't have like some, high level track and field program. So I liked to run as a kid, but it wasn't like heated at it. And then when I was at university in my early 20s, I thought, wouldn't it be fun to do a half marathon? And I don't know where I got this idea from. I was going out jogging, like for fitness, but I don't think I had any concept of really how far this was or that kind of stuff. So yeah, I did my first half marathon in my early 20s, and I just had a great time and wasn't that fun. And then after university, I moved over to Canada, to Vancouver, where I am now, in BC. And there was, as there is in many cities, like a running store, and they were putting on a marathon clinic. And it was the traditional, come and run with us for 16 to 18 weeks, and we'll get you to the finish line of a marathon. So, again, that was probably when I was around about 23 or so. And I went and did that marathon. I did all the training. It was a great way to meet friends, like being in the new city, to sort of like have a social sort of contact. And again, I did the marathon, and I guess, a lot of people might get totally put off, whereas I thought that was really good fun. So it really just snowballed from there. But certainly, for the first 4 or 5 years, like I was, a recreational runner that kind of wanted to do well, but I certainly was not doing super structured training by any means.
So I have two follow-up questions to that. One, so just going out and kind of just doing a marathon just kind of for fun and you know, with the little training group. What was your marathon time for that first one?
So for that first one, it was 3 hours 25. So it's still reasonable, but I always backtrack to that and say the first half marathon that I'd done, which would have been probably 18 months before, I did it in 1 hour, 59:57. So literally squeaked under the 2 hour mark. But that had been, doing the half marathon had been just going out running on my own. Like, I honestly have no idea how much training I was doing and that kind of stuff. Whereas, yeah, when I ran the 3:25, which is pretty nice, right, for a first marathon, you know, I'd gone through this structured program. So even though I myself didn't know that much about running, you know, I was following this program and training with a group, like, you know, twice a week. So that definitely helped.
Oh, so that's pretty awesome. The other question I have to know, what is netball?
Okay, so netball is a sport. The most similar you can say is it's like basketball, but it's actually nothing like basketball. It's played in the UK, the Netherlands, and Australia mostly, and I haven't found any other countries in the world that play it. But every British schoolgirl, it's only girls that play it, will have played netball. You have seven aside. You have a net, kind of like a basketball hoop, but you don't have a backboard, and it's slightly lower. And the 7 players, each of them are only allowed in certain areas of the court. So it's quite like restricted, and you can't move with the ball. And there's lots of rules. But if you had to say what it's most like, it's like basketball. It sounds
like something I'd be absolutely horrible at.
I'd be a little bit interested to hear, you know, what was the time frame, since, you know, the ultra marathon is really what you specialize in and what you do. What was that time frame between going from that first marathon to that first ultra distance? And then what distance was that? Was like making that next step to the 50K, or did you do something different?
No, I did the 50K first, and I think it was probably, and this, I mean, all this of like me being vague dates kind of shows how I was not like, I was just doing it for fun and who really paid attention, right? But it was probably in the space of about 2.5, 3 years, I think, that I did that first ultra. It was a 50K. It was on January 1st here in Vancouver, and it's organized by a group called Club Fat Ass. So it's no entry fee. I mean, now, despite there being no entry fee, it sells out, right? And literally, but it was this novel idea of like, you know, crazy ultra runners, right? What else do you do on January 1st other than go run 50K? So it was a non-marked course. It was kind of a bit around the city, so a bit on like paved surfaces. But then it also went into some of the beautiful like urban parks, like gravel trails and forests that we've got in Vancouver. And I just heard about it, and it appealed, like this, oh, you can run further than a marathon? Like, that seems kind of cool, right? So I don't think I particularly knew people that did ultras before then, but I just heard about it, and it was like, it just intrigued me. So I did that, and then after that, not right away, but within the next year, I got into, you know, the local running scene of, you know, running a bit more on trails, and also the ultra distance events, which, you know, there's quite a trail and ultra running community in the Vancouver area. So, yeah, this would be around, you know, 2005, 2006 kind of time frame.
So I have to ask, did you win it?
I don't even know, Chris.
Oh my God.
Well, because it was so much about participation, and you just get to the finish line and they say, what's your time? And they write it down. And I mean, goodness, this was probably even before Facebook, so results didn't even go on Facebook. Maybe you got an email like a week later, right, of this is who did it. I might have come first. I might have come second, something like that. But really, it was like, yeah, like there was definitely not chip timing at that event, for sure.
But I love it. I see now, if I had won something, I would clearly remember. Now, of course, you've had much bigger wins since that, but I'd be like any little first in my age group. I'm marking it down. It all counts. Some of your big highlights, like you've we were talking about, so between Western States, Comrades, the 100K World Championships, those are all such amazing, amazing wins. But they're also very, very different races. Our audience, we kind of have a mix of everybody from people who are just kind of start out and who are newer, some people doing half marathons, and then we have a lot of people who are full on into the ultra world. So kind of for some of the other people who don't know, can you kind of explain kind of what makes those races different, you know, kind of how important they are?
Yeah, for sure. And I would definitely say, like, you picked out the three, you know, like if someone says, what are your biggest achievements, right? Like those three races are for sure, right? I guess if I go to say the first one that I personally did was World 100K, which I did in 2010. And for me, the real appeal of doing that was you got to represent your country, right? So, I mean, I always, like, it sounds a crazy thing, but I always remember, because I'm now a Canadian citizen, like I run for the UK. And so it's this like neat concept of like, wow, I could actually represent like GB at an international event. And I got my kit and I was like, I think I thought we'd get some, you know, like ultra runners kit that was some low key, like stuff that they found in the corner. And instead I was like, wow, this is the gear that Paula Radcliffe wore at the Olympics, right? And it's true. Like, so that was a real honor and a real appeal of like, something growing up. I never thought I would represent my country at like an athletics event. So that was definitely an appeal to me in that. World 100K is always on road. And simply for like logistics in terms of, teams crewing for you, measurement of the course, etc. They tend to be on the fairly small looped courses. So I've run it 3 times. I've had 1 DNF and 2 wins, and they've either been 10K loops, so 6 miles, or 5-kilometer loops, so a little under 3-mile loops, and you just run around in circles. So it's not an ultra that's for everyone, and it's not even, I would honestly say, like a kind of course that would necessarily appeal to me. But for sure, like trying to get a really fast 100K time, they're set up for that. And for me, it was more about, being on a team representing like your country that's really cool about going to the IAU events, and also getting like, they truly are international. Like you get the best runners from all over the world. Whereas if I go on to say something like Western States, although it's known all over the world in terms of ultra running, it is still, predominantly, and partly because it's difficult to get into, but, like dominated by North Americans, right? So it's a bit of a different atmosphere. So I first did World 100K in 2010. And then in 2011, I did both Comrades and Western States. So I'll touch on Western States first, which is it's a trail 100-miler. So I always do kind of, again, make the slight joke. I've only ever run 2 100-mile races, and they were both Western States. So I think I'll just keep my winning score at that and never do another one again. Western States, it's very classic Californian single track. It's right in the middle of June. So hot temperatures tend to be an issue in the race, or, add to the challenge maybe. That was my first attempt at running the 100-mile distance. And it's a very historic race. And as I mentioned, it's very hard to get into. Like they have a lottery and a qualifying process, and people can put I don't know what the percentage is that gets in out of the lottery, but it's small. So it's a different vibe because, it's like everyone has their support crew and lots of the runners there. But also it's a race where there's only a few hundred people in it. So even although it's, the biggest and the best, in my personal opinion, when it comes to 100-milers, it's not actually a massive event. And it's a very hilly course, like for sure. I always say to my coaching clients, like, hilly is a relative word, right? Like Western States isn't a mountainous course for sure, but there's, you're going down into the canyons, down to the American River. So you've got a pretty good amount of elevation and descent throughout the course. And then touching on the third race there, the Comrades Marathon, which is a bit of a confusing name to call it. So Comrades is in South Africa. It is, I believe, the oldest ultramarathon in the world. It's been going since the 1920s, and it's 89 kilometers, or about 56 miles. World War, South African soldiers came back home to South Africa, and they wanted to put on this amazing physical challenge to commemorate their fallen comrades in the First World War. So Comrades is absolutely steeped in history, and there's all these little nuggets of little cool stories and things that you pick up on. And like I said, it's been running for over 90 years. It's a point-to-point race, and it reverses direction every year. So one year it's net uphill, one year it's net downhill. Every year they get somewhere between 16 and 18,000 runners participating in it. So it's like doing a big city marathon, except the final cutoff is 12 hours. So it's just, Comrades is like nothing else, and you honestly cannot explain what it's like until you've been there. And just the atmosphere, like I said, of little things, like they've got different types of medals for everyone that finishes under different hours. So even someone that's like closer to the back of the pack, they're like, I want to get under 11 hours instead of like 11:02, because then I'll get a different medal. And it's a huge community, and just to be able to participate in an ultra with that many, like thousands of people, and because it's a road race, like you've got people like cheering along the sides of the course. It's very different from running Western States, where you can be like down in a canyon on a single track trail with maybe 2 or 3 other runners for a whole bunch of the race. So
I've got a quick question for you that came up, which you talked about a lot of different types of races, and for you personally, what type of race is one that, I mean, you really feel like you're strong at? What type of race, whether it be very hilly, like a Western States, or something like a Comrades, which I really don't know a lot about that course, or, something that's more flat like a road race. I mean, where do you feel like your sweet spot is?
I would say for sure, like round about the 50-mile distance. And something of, like, to be honest, Comrades is pretty much a sweet spot for me, or something like Comrades, which is, I always say it's unrelentingly hilly. Like if you come from a road background, people are really surprised how hilly Comrades is. For some trail runners, they're like, oh, this isn't so bad, right? Because a trail runner, you tend to be a little more used to hills. But, that's kind of 50-mile distance where the hills are runnable. So, I mean, I've done other races. There's the UTMB 100-miler in France, in Chamonix, and I've done the 100K version of that. So 62 miles, but it's a mountain race. And for me, where you're like over that kind of distance and terrain, you end up hiking hills. That's not so much my forte. So give me something that's runnable, 50-ish miles. If you give me a flat 50K, I mean, I can't deny I'm a decent marathoner, but I'm not like a crazy fast marathoner. So, a flat 50K, I'm just not like absolutely up there being like the super speediest. So, yeah. So
what fascinates me about that is talking about that being your sweet spot, but what you did in Western States then is just unbelievable. And so that goes against almost like everything you said where your sweet spot is. And so when you ran it in 2012 and you set the course record, which still stands, I mean, you smashed Ann Trayson's record by it was about 50 minutes. And what I find really interesting about that too is you are the only woman to have ever gone under 17 hours for that race. It's just amazing. So for 100 milers that you're talking about. And I think what's kind of interesting too, are you surprised that no one has, maybe not necessarily taken that record away, but that no one else has ever gone under 17 hours. I kind of feel like it's almost like that magic 4-minute mile that as soon as, somebody broke it, then people saw it was possible, but nobody's even come close.
Yeah, I mean, there's a few things I think that are combined there. And I guess one of the reasons, like going back to your previous question where I'm like, 50 miles is my distance. I mean, like I said, I've done 200 milers in their Western states. And I just think, for anybody, that 100-mile distance, like it takes longer to really feel like comfortable and really confident with, because there's so many more unknowns of like, you could have had the perfect training and just like there's so much that can go wrong once you get to that 100-mile distance. So 2012, when I ran it, it was the second coolest year ever, which it has a big influence. Now, it's really hard to say, like, okay, well, had the average temperature that day been, I don't know, I'm sorry, I'm so Canadian with my metric versus imperial, but like, had it been like 10 degrees warmer, right, and therefore a bit more of a normal temperature, what sort of time would I run? Like, nobody knows.
Right.
But it was a year where, there was more runners under 24 hours than normal. Tim Olsen broke the men's course record. I think maybe even that year, like, it might have been Dave Mackey got like the Masters record. So it was a fast day in terms of the conditions, which can have a big influence, especially when you're running 100 miles. I'm not super surprised that no one's run under 17 hours. I think women will start getting closer to it for sure, right? But I also have to say, like, I mean, I was super fit going into that race and nothing went wrong, right? Like, people say, what do you do? I'm like, I just ran. I got to an aid station. I ate and drank. I carry on. I ran. I pick up a pacer. Then I got my other pacer later on. Then I carried on. I put a headlamp on for a little bit, and oh boom, I got to the finish line. Right? There was no excitement, as it were. It was just like, it was very methodical. Like I didn't really have any stomach issues, or I just didn't blow out my quads or anything like that. And I just went out and ran. And I think sometimes you do have those magical days, and I think for sure other women can have those, and I think they will start getting faster times. But I kind of hope that if they're going to get close to the kind of time that I ran in 2012, there's got to be a bit of good luck with weather on the day.
Yeah, that makes total sense. So those are the only 200s that you ran. I know that at one point you were planning on running Leadville, but I believe, was it an injury that you had to pull out of Leadville?
Yeah, like that was a few years ago. I'd been hoping to run Leadville, and I suffered my fair share of injuries. So that one, unfortunately, it was one I would have loved to have raced, but just didn't pan out. So, yeah.
So is it still on your bucket list then? Or are you kind of done with the hundreds?
So I'm injured right now, and I've had a long-term injury. Would I like to run Leadville? Yeah, but I'd like to run a lot of things, and you can't always have what you want. I mean, the reason that something like Leadville appealed and still does appeal for me is I do tend to like the more historical, like well-established races, the ones that have been around that you can go, oh yeah, so-and-so ran it like 30 years ago. I like the stories and the history of races just as much as race courses. And I do think because Leadville is quite runnable, like for the kind of runner I am, like it would actually like suit me quite well in terms of like leg speed over that long distance. Right now, I don't know if I'll ever get back to running 100 miles. So that's my only hesitation in saying that.
Gotcha.
Well, you said something about you're interested in the history of some of these races. Are there some ultra runners, male or female, in the past that you kind of look up to, or you think are interesting characters that just the history of the sport is something interesting to you?
Yeah. I mean, I guess there's kind of two sides to that in one way. So when I was, 2005, 2006, getting into ultra running, and of course everyone had their subscription to like Trail Runner magazine, because again, there wasn't as much like online. Even it makes me sound like I'm talking about ages ago and I'm really old, but so I always used to read about people like Lizzie Hawker and Cami Semmett, Nikki Kimball, and Chrissy Mail, and I'd still honestly say like those are the 4 women that I look up to. And I think because they've been around since I was new to the sport, and they were the ones in the magazine. And, someone like Lizzie Hawker, who I was like, oh, she's British, right? And so, it's like, so just following along their kind of stuff. And, I love to see what they've done over the years. So definitely I'd say those 4 women are the ones that from the start were like inspiring in just terms of, what they were racing and what they were achieving. And then on another side, if I go to something like, I shouldn't say this, maybe a little older, but like linked to something like Comrades, there's someone called Bruce Fordyce. He's a South African runner. Bruce is now in his mid to late 50s, and he has won Comrades 9 times, which no one has ever run it that many times. He's still got the world 50-mile record from 1980 something that no one has yet to break. And Bruce is just like, he's an absolutely super person as well. Like he's the most approachable and good fun. And he's always at Comrades still every year. Like sometimes he's running it and he's now like kind of, reasonably middle of the pack running it, or he's on the TV and doing commentary and that kind of stuff. So, someone like that who just feel like he was around really in quite a different.
It seems to me that ultra racing is getting a little bit more mainstream with the with live streaming on the internet and maybe some things being televised. That especially like Western states. Are you thinking that that's only going to increase in the future? And is that something that you want to see in ultra running?
Yeah, I definitely think it's going to increase. I mean, I think it's the way of the world, just like, like communication is much easier. And with the advent of, social media, these, I guess, what were maybe generally considered kind of fringe sports before, it just opens it up to a wider audience where people can see like, oh, look, what is this ultra running? And like, it's, I don't know, for some reason, something pops up and it piques their interest. So I do think ultra running will continue to grow. I do think there probably is some kind of limit to it. Like, for me, one of the appeals of, well, any kind of running, but I think, you could put that to a bit more extreme of ultra running is like, it's hard work, right? Like you get out what you put in. So, and to some people, I think that kind of sport just doesn't actually appeal, right? So it's not like suddenly everyone who has run a half marathon or a marathon is going to go, oh yeah, I want to run 100 miles now, right? Like some people just go, no, like, thanks very much. Like that's enough for me, right? So, but for sure, there's still, of course, like an untapped audience out there of people who are just hearing about ultra running or hearing about the races. And then, just in terms of like communities growing in different spots right across the country. And then, of course, it's easier because if you know someone that runs an ultra, hey, you can train together, or maybe a race pops up in your local area. So instead of you having to travel to go to one, it's like, oh, I've always wanted to do an ultra and now there's one in my local park. So I'll go do that. So definitely I think it's growing. And to me, it's wrong to complain that other people are enjoying the sports that you're enjoying, right? And maybe there are some people in the world of ultras that kind of like doing it because it's a bit quirky and not many people do it. But I think, hey, the more people that want to get out there and challenge themselves and have fun, it's awesome. That's super. And then, in terms of, like the stuff of, okay, it's getting maybe a bit more coverage, say in like mainstream newspapers or, books that are coming out, like whether it's the training manuals about ultra running and that kind of stuff, and social media. I mean, I think that's great, but I think, as a sport, we've got to be careful with that as well of, do we want to change the atmosphere of some of our races, for example, right? Like, do we want to have like crowds and crowds of people at trail races? Or is one of the reasons we like to do trail races is because, hey, we get away from the hubbub of road racing, right? So I think, each person involved in it, whether they're runners or sponsors or race directors, we've got to think those things through rather than just letting them happen, and, really try and, in some ways, like, protect a bit of the identity of our sport, which is that it's a little bit more low key, and it's not always big hype and that kind of stuff. And that's part of the reason that a lot of people are drawn to ultra running in the first place. So.
Yeah, that's great. That makes a lot of sense. Chandler, did you have some questions?
Yeah, I actually had a question about when you raced Comrades in 2014. I know you were coming off kind of an injury, and I was really wondering, during that race, I know you mentioned it was really hilly, moderately hilly, and I was wondering if, like, the mental aspect of coming off an injury, that had put you out, was kind of harder or as equally as hard as the physical aspect during that race, if it kind of put you in a bad headspace, or if that was just something that gave you more drive to do it.
Yeah, like, I definitely went into that race like way more determined, I guess would be it, because so I'd run Comrades in 2011 and 2012, and in 2012 I'd placed second by 72 seconds in a 6+ hour race. So at that time, like, I was absolutely delighted that I came second. Like, I don't think I went into the race in 2012 thinking, oh, I could win this. Like, it was probably there at the back of my mind, but I was like, I just came out like, wow, I came second. So of course I'd really hoped to go back the next year. And then I actually got a stress fracture in 2013. So 2013 was out. And I guess, having something taken away from you that maybe before, I never really presumed and took an assumption, but you do, like, as runners, we all set out, like, racing schedules of what are we going to do next year and what have we signed up for, and you just kind of, like, to a certain extent go, yeah, I'm going to do this and I'm going to do that, and then suddenly, like, your bone in your leg tells you, no, you're not going to do that. So when I came back in 2014, like, I'd only set one goal, and that was, I am going to make it to Comrades in 2014. Like, to me, like, and also I had this, like, okay, you can't assume you will. It was like, I'm prepared to put everything else aside if that's all I can do, because that was the one race that I'd really, like, been disappointed to miss out on the year before. And then when I went in 2014, I went in with a different attitude from 2012, because I was like, well, I only have to run 73 seconds faster and maybe I can win this thing. And that seemed achievable, right? And it was also like, that would be really, really amazing to win, like, such a huge race, right? So I went in on, say, more determined and more focused on that one race, rather than, oh yeah, I really want to do well at Comrades, but I've also got all these other races planned around it. Like, I was quite single-minded on that one event. So
that's wonderful. So this might be a good chance to jump over and talk about kind of injuries. I know that you've unfortunately had your battles with them, and you kind of have, this ongoing one as well. But what's interesting is that you always come across as somebody who's very positive and very patient. How do you maintain that while dealing with an injury?
Okay, I'm kind of laughing at that right now, because I think my friends might have a different opinion on patience and positivity. But it's nice that I obviously come across like that. And that's what you've got to try and be, right? If I go back, and I have been plagued with numerous injuries, which I'll put my hand up, like, some of them are probably just down to the plain fact that I love running and I sometimes run too much, right? Like, I get carried away and I love it and I just want to do more and more and more, and then, like, I fall apart. So, if I go back to, say, 2013, when I had a stress fracture, like, obviously, like, initially that was devastating because Comrades was out, Western States was out. Like, there was all these races that I'd had on my calendar, and it was like, okay, they're not happening. But I think, like, for sure at that point, I kind of said, well, look, like, no injuries are permanent, right? Or very few are. I'm now, reassessing that mindset. But at that point, it's like, okay, you've got a stress fracture. It's terrible. Like, you're something like, oh, I can't do this and I can't do that. But there's a protocol behind a stress fracture, right? You take a certain amount of time off, you build back gradually, you should be okay, right? So however frustrating it is, and you do have to have some of that patience element, and I did stuff like that year I went and bought a road bike, right? Because I was like, I've always kind of fancied a road bike. Well, now's the time that I'm not going to be able to run, so I might actually get on a bike more. So great, like, let's, turn it into a positive, right? So I think having those like proactive things of doing that and just, you can look back and go, well, I know so-and-so had a stress fracture, or they did, and look at what race results or running they're doing now. And so sort of using other people as, keeping you motivated of, look, they got back at it, so why can't I? I think the last year and a half has definitely been a test of my patience. I have now been on and off injured for a year and a half. And this is a bit more, the basic summary right now, which we could do a whole series of podcasts about my current injury, which would not be at all exciting. But they seem to think I have nerve issues in my lower back that are causing certain muscles to shut off in one leg, and then other muscles get overused, and all sorts of nerve pain and that kind of stuff down my leg. But it's taken a long time. And even now, there's some doubt, is this really what it is? So this has been a more frustrating injury because you go, okay, I'll be patient. Maybe, this will be a couple of weeks. And then you go, okay, maybe this is more a couple of months injury. And then after a couple of months, you go, okay, and now I'll scratch that other race off my calendar. It's hard to be patient, but you learn to be patient because you have no other choice. Right. And over time, your mindset adapts of, to start with, the idea of taking a week off running was like, oh my goodness, I can't do that. And then you get to the point where someone says, take 3 weeks off, and you go, okay, right, no problem. And you don't have so much of a problem with it because, it's become the much bigger picture of things. And then in terms of, keeping positive, for me, I'm, you start to really identify, yes, I like running for running, but what are the other reasons you like running for? And for me, it's the social, it's the challenging yourself, it's getting out on the trails. So right now I do quite a lot of hiking because, hey, I get on a trail and no, I'm not running and I would love to be running on the trail. But given you just have to accept, okay, I can't run, but look, I can hike, right? And so kind of, staying positive through, identifying what you get out of running other than the actual, thing of running itself, and trying to find those things, and for me, part of it is, trying to stay active, whether it's going to the gym and, seeing a personal trainer. So setting yourself new challenges that way that you might not have done otherwise. So
at this point, have you put anything on your 28 calendar, or have you kind of just scratched everything off at this point?
No, I haven't scratched it off because they never got put on there. So I have now learned, and I say that in a joking manner, but and that was one thing I learned. When I got injured at the start of last year, I had a whole year of races that I'd lined up. So each race was progressively scratched off as well. Maybe I'll get to that one. Oh no, I didn't. Okay, well, maybe the next one. So this year, and unfortunately as it stands for next year, and it just leads to more disappointment. So I'm and you also set much smaller goals. A goal right now would be to get running and to get pain-free and to, make weekly progress in terms of, how far I can run or the volume that I do in the week, or then weaving in like, hey, I'd like to get to doing, speed workouts with my running club and that kind of stuff. So I would much more set those kind of goals first. And yeah, as of now for next year, like I don't feel able to plan anything the way my running is right now. And there's no point, because it would just lead to too much disappointment if they did have to get scratched off. So
that makes sense. I mean, and I think that's something good of, like you talked about, kind of focusing on what you can control and setting those goals and at least, getting out on the trails or doing the things that you do enjoy, even if it's not running.
Yeah. I mean, there comes a certain point where you just have to accept the reality, and you also have to go like, and people might not quite understand this if they've not, because I mean, I love running, like I absolutely love it, but you do have to go like, it's not the be all and end all in the world, right? Like there are actually more important things in the world than running, believe it or not. And so you just have to like at some point come around to that and, keep that focus. And you might have days where you think like, no, running is the most important thing in the world. But yeah, just, appreciate what you can do and what you have got. Yeah.
Well, I'm really impressed with the attitude that you have on being able to say, no, I'm going to back off. I'm going to get myself healthy, and I'm not going to push things harder than I really have to, which kind of leads into the coaching aspect of what you're doing right now. And so you started coaching with Charmin Ultra, and so you even did that whenever you were still in heavy competition mode. And but what made you want to go into coaching?
Yeah, so, I mean, I started coaching a bit over 3 years ago. And it was something I'd been considering. But, at the time I had a full-time, like totally unrelated to running day job, and I was doing all my training. But I was looking for, a bit of a change in my working life. And I'd increasingly had, those random Facebook messages or friends say to me like, oh, do you do coaching? And I'm looking for a coach. And so it was like, well, there's obviously people out there that, would like to have me coaching them. And I guess there also comes a point where you get a certain amount of experience and you actually want to share that experience, right? And I find it really rewarding, right? And I coach people of all sorts of abilities, and yeah, it's a really fun thing to do, because I say most of my coaching clients like want a coach because they love their running, right? And they're really into it. And they're pretty motivated, and you help guide them, and and feel like for some people, like running their first 50K is like a really, really big deal and something they never thought they'd do. And so it's really neat to be able to be a part of that, and for them, even a simple little, which I don't expect it, right? But when they say thank you afterwards, like you really helped me. So it's a very rewarding job to do, I would say. Helping guide people through their ultra running.
What's the most satisfying to you? That client that completes their first 50K and goes from a 8-hour to a 6-hour, someone who's really making a big step right there that might be a beginner? Or is it that person that gets that PR that, they've taken 5 minutes off their 50K time or less, that is a really good athlete and they're just trying to and shave a little bit off and get a little bit better? Which of those do you enjoy the best to coach?
I wouldn't really say either. I think it depends how invested the person is in getting their goals, and therefore how much it means to them, right? So,
okay.
Someone could be, and I've been guilty of this myself, right? Like you win a race and someone goes, oh, congratulations. You're like, oh, I'm kind of disappointed actually, right? Because you start like, oh, well, this went wrong, or that didn't go so wrong, or, like you said, they might have been this amazing runner and they've improved by 5 minutes, but they wanted to improve by 15, right? So then, that's not. So it very much depends. I guess it's just about what their goals are, how achievable their goals are, and do they reach those goals or do they far exceed them? And that's something that meant something to that person. And that's kind of regardless of speed or distance or that kind of stuff.
We mentioned that you coach under the Charmin Ultra. For those who don't know, can you go ahead and explain who the Charmin is?
Yes, the Charmin.
The Charmin.
It's Ian Charmin, a fellow Brit who has lived in the USA in Bend, Oregon for many years. Ian is known for his metronomic running of 100-mile races, be it, I've lost track. I think he's done 8 Western states in the top 10. It might be 7, it might be 9, I can't remember. He's also won Rocky Raccoon numerous times, Leadville, all that kind of stuff. So, Ian set up the coaching business a couple of years before I got on board. And this, referring back to what we were talking about before, about the growth of ultra running, there's a growth of people wanting to be coached for ultra running. And whether it's because, hey, they've heard about these races, but they're like, I don't know how to train for that. And I think people just valuing, expertise and experience and, having someone to call on. So, I was the first other coach that Ian took on under the Charmin Ultra umbrella. And we've now got a team where we've got Liza Howard, Zach Bitter, Sean Meissner, and Magdu Billet, and myself and Ian on the team. So it's great as well to have that, we're a little team together and we can call on each other, whether it's course-specific advice for one of our individuals that we're coaching or all those kinds of things. It really works out.
Great. Chandler, why don't you jump in here with some questions?
Oh, okay. So I guess on the topic of coaching, obviously, coaching is, I'm guessing, pretty different from competing, but what would you say you could use from coaching, what you've learned coaching others, to help in your own running?
Yeah, that's always a difficult question, right? Because you learn stuff that you sometimes don't want to learn. Like now I would probably race less than I did in the past, right? And this is it, you see a whole wealth of, and like the details of other people's runnings, right? Of, oh, well, that didn't pan out because they wanted to do, far too many ultras and, I don't know, they got injured or they got burnt out or they just didn't get the results they wanted. So I guess, sometimes I see things like that, which, as someone who would love to race a lot, you then suddenly have to go, okay, am I one of those people? And some people can race a massive amount and other people can't. And you go, okay, maybe am I one of those kind of people? But overall as well, which, is something I knew before, but you just see the people that put in the consistent, like regular, boring, sometimes like hard work of training, like they're the ones that can go into race day confident that, sure, little things might go wrong and you might not have, the absolute best race, but you're going to have a good race, right? Because you've just basically put in the groundwork and, had that consistency in the training.
What sort of advice can you give to people who are looking to go into the longer distances? The listeners to this podcast, they range anywhere from 5K runners all the way through to ultra runners, and so if someone may want to make that step to the ultra distance, they might be afraid of time constraints and being able to balance family, work, and training, and that's something that I always struggle with myself. What advice can you give those people that maybe they can make this happen if they wanted to?
Yeah. So, if someone's literally going up like to their first ultra, I would say start out with 50K. And there are people that go right on in at like, okay, I'm going to do a 50 miler. And for some people, and I've had clients do that, and I'm like, yep, actually no problem. I think you are the kind of person, or you've got like a big enough running background over marathon or shorter distances that they can do that. But also, choose your race carefully. Like if you are going to, if you kind of are just going in with like, I'd like to do one ultra so I can say I've done it and maybe I'll get really into it. But, if not, I'd just like to say I've done one, right? Choose a race particularly if you are worried about cutoffs. I mean, firstly, look at the cutoffs, right? And if you know, like, scroll down past results. And if you go, oh, I know that person, and, you know, I run with them in a half marathon or something, well, are they right at the back of the pack in this ultra, or where are they? You know, so try and get a ballpark there. And if you're particularly worried about cutoff, try and choose a course that you can maybe train on somewhat similar terrain, right? So even if you see some photos of some beautiful mountain 50K and you're like, oh, that just looks like absolutely outstanding, but it's in Colorado, so it's at elevation, and you live somewhere where you're like, okay, like maybe once every 3 weeks I can run on a trail, and otherwise I'm going to be running around my neighborhood on, you know, like gravel paths or paved paths, then maybe you want to choose, you know, a race that might not look so appealing, but you can get in and get a handle on the distance. And then, you know, you could think about, you know, going for that Colorado Mountain Ultra afterwards on the step up. But yeah, choose one that you think is a bit more achievable in terms of terrain.
Well, what do you think some of the biggest mistakes that people, once they get into the world of ultra, what are some of those big mistakes that you think people do that might hurt their chances of being successful?
I mean, there's all sorts of things that people might do that can lead to that, right? I mean, a basic one is, let's say, particularly someone coming from roads, and this is more a problem for actually like pretty decent runners, like let's say our like Boston qualifier kind of runners, right? And they look at the paces of a trail ultra and they go, that's so slow, I can do that. And then they realize that there's a reason that the paces are so slow, right? Like it's muddy, there's creek crossings, you know, it might not be a super hilly course, but oh, look, there's lots of roots and rocks I've got to jump over and all this kind of stuff. And I actually, like I say, I think that's more of a problem for the more accomplished road runners that just look at paces and they can't compute why people are running so slowly until they get out there. So I guess that's also going back to, you know, like choosing something that you can at least ideally train on a bit of the terrain, because then before race day, you would start to get a feel of, oh, okay, like suddenly 11-minute miling actually seems quite hard, and this is why, right? So I'd say that's one of the things. Another thing is, like, some people just think they need to run a crazy amount, right? Like they suddenly think like, oh, I've got to do like tons of really long runs, and I better like add an extra run to my weekly schedule. So instead of running 4 days a week, I'm now going to do 5, and I'm going to, and they just overtrain. And so they get to the race and they feel pretty confident in the distance, but they're maybe just tired or a little broken, and also maybe a little burnt out, right? Like they've just kind of had enough of the training now because they've suddenly done, you know, like you say, people have got families and jobs, and they've really tried to cram in too much running to the point that they've kind of stopped enjoying it. And then maybe a third and sort of final one that a lot of people, I would say, don't really think about enough is like the race day nutrition side of things. And I'm sure, again, if you've got like road marathoners, they've got like horror stories of, oh yeah, you know, like, you know, hitting the wall at mile 20 or whatever. Now, I don't know, if you go into, like a 50K, 31 miles, well, you don't have like 6 miles to stumble to the finish line. You've now got 11 to stumble to the finish line. So that going back to the really basic for any running of practice in training what you're going to do on race day. So eat those weird things in training. Try and eat more gels than you did before and find out, oh no, that was too many. Okay, well, at least I messed up a training run rather than race day. So really thinking about your nutrition and really trying to get on top of it, because you've also got to think, like I say, even if you go back to that like 50K, 31 mile distance, and you think, well, it's just 5 miles more, but it's going to be time-wise, if you're probably going to be on a trail, maybe a few hills, way more in duration than your marathon distance. So, you know, nutrition and hydration play, you know, can be much bigger factor when it comes to ultra running.
Do you think that speed work and intervals, maybe some track work, is that something that's useful in training for ultras?
Yeah, definitely. And again, it depends on the individual runner, like their experience, how soon their race is, what their goals are at that race. And then the distance, I mean, anything from 50K up, right? But again, it's something, going back to the idea of what I said, some people for the first ultra just think, I just need to pile on more and more miles. Whereas instead of going for quantity, you still want some of that quality running in there, because it goes without saying, like, the faster you are a runner, the less time you'll be out on any race course. And that's actually easier because you don't have to, drink and fuel for as long. You just don't have the wear and tear on your legs of being out there for 8 hours compared to 6. So, yeah, it's definitely, it depends on the individual. Like, if someone had not really done a lot of speed workouts before and now they're talking about their first ultra, it depends how soon it was, but I don't know that would be the first time to go, okay, well, let's get you on the track, because you want to do, because you'd also be trying to bring in some of that volume. So it's a bit of balance. But for sure, I think, for most runners, if they've had experience of doing speed workout, tempos, hill repeats, that kind of stuff, then they should keep some of that in their training, and maybe at different phases of their training, but definitely at some point during their training for an ultra.
All right. Well, we're kind of getting a little bit long here, but I know that I've got one more question that I want to ask, and this is for the benefit of Crystal, and and so we're gonna try to get some free coaching advice out of you. But if you do have to charge us, then you can bill Crystal, because this is for her. But she is going to be running Tunnel Hill 100-mile this weekend, and so she's going to be running. She'll be running overnight. And I think we need to give her a little advice and a little help on what it's going to take to get her through that cold, dark night and to the finish line. And so, do you have any overnight running guidance for her?
Okay, I know nothing about you, Crystal, right? So I don't know if you've run 100 miles before, or if you've run at night before. I don't know.
So let me tell you. I'll give you a little bit. So this is going to be my first. This is my first 100-miler. However, I have run through the night. So for practice for this, I did a 10-hour overnight. So it went from 8 p.m. to 8 a.m. Actually, Andy was there as well. So I have experience running through the night, and I actually do the majority of my runs in the dark, just because I run at 4:30 in the morning before I go to work. Okay. So the dark and all that I'm good with. But what Andy kind of touched on there too is the cold is what kind of concerns me, because when I've done most of the overnight running, it's been warm. And so in Illinois, in November, with the time change, they're talking about it could go down into the 30s, and it typically does go down into the 30s. And I know that's when I'm going to be tired. I'm going to be walking. So that's kind of the stuff that concerns me.
You've thought about it all already, Crystal, right? So, okay. What I always overemphasize to people, and they go, yeah, of course I've thought about that, is have spare headlamps and spare batteries, right? Yeah. Because there's some things like, okay, you forget a gel and you go, oh, darn, like I'm going to be a bit hungry and a bit short until I get to the next aid station. If your headlamp batteries go and you have, 5 miles until the next aid station, like, you're kind of in trouble, right? Sure, if you've got a pacer or you happen to be running next to someone, but now you have to run next to that other racer because they've got a light and you haven't, right? And also, in terms of, which you probably won't get into in a 100-miler, right? But that like sleepiness aspect of like, oh, it's like 3 a.m. and normally I would have like gone to bed and had like hours of sleep. So the more lighting you have, the better. So I tend to encourage people to wear a headlamp and then maybe have like either like a waist lamp or a handheld or something extra, right? And having those well ahead of when you think you'll need to pick them up, just in case things go a little wrong and it gets darker earlier than you think it might do. So that's one thing. And then like you already said, like the cold, right? And you've already kind of mentioned the fact that like you're going to be physically exerting yourself, and therefore kind of worn down and a little tired. So you're going to feel the cold even more. And as you've mentioned, maybe you're walking, or even if you're running, you're going at 100-mile pace. So just have, like, particularly if you think you might sweat during the day, I don't really know, like Illinois daytime temperatures, right? But like have a dry set of clothing for the night. It doesn't take long to change it, and just go like over the top, like hat, gloves, layers. if you've got people crewing your drop bag, you're way better to have gear that you don't end up using than just wishing you had an extra layer. So I would, go for like dressing almost colder than you would if you were going out for like a 10-mile run in that temperature. Yeah.
Wonderful. Thank you. That's all awesome advice. So, and I have to admit, looking at my bags and stuff, I was going to go with one light and one battery. So we are making that change right now because now I know for sure it'll fail.
Right now.
I am. I'm on Amazon on the other.
It's just one of those things where it's like, if that goes wrong, like some things, like I said, you can take risks at because you're like, well, if that goes wrong, it's not a deal breaker. Whereas it's always worth thinking ahead of a race. Okay, if something goes wrong, I don't want to say your race is over, but you're now going really slowly. So two headlamps for sure.
Thank you.
All right. Well, does anyone have any more questions for Ellie?
I have my question answered, so I'm good.
I think I'm good here.
Good luck, Crystal.
Thank you.
All right. So on social media, you've got your blog at Ellie Greenwood blogspot.com. You are on Twitter, Facebook, Instagram. We'll go ahead and throw some links on there if anyone wants to get in contact with you. Do you have any other contact information for your coaching you'd like for us to get out there?
That would be super. I mean, if anyone, is interested in coaching with either myself or any of the other coaches I mentioned, Charman Ultra, they can just go on to, it's charmanultra.com. So that's SHARMAN ultra.com. And there's all the kind of details in there, and they can reach out and contact us if they're ever of interest.
All right. Well, we will throw those into the show notes for anyone, so that way it'll be convenient for them to find. Definitely, I want to thank you very much for coming on to the show. This has been great. You've been a wealth of knowledge. We wish you luck on your upcoming running and ultra adventures. And hopefully, if we can get you back on again, we'd like to do that.
Yeah, that would be super. And thanks so much for having me on.
All right, thank you. Well, I'd like to give a shout out to the Ozark Mountain Daredevils for the use of their music. If you want some more information on the podcast, you can visit www.heartlandrunning.com. We've got the show notes. We've got some other interesting stuff there. Make sure that you join our Facebook group because that's where the fun always happens. And then we have a new phone number where you can leave us a message or send us a text. That's new, so that's pretty fun. And so anyway, if you have something interesting you want to tell us and maybe a trail review or a race review, some cool gear that you like, go ahead and tell us about it. If we like what we hear, we'll put you on the air. Also, make sure you tell a friend about the show and give us a review on iTunes. The more reviews we have, the easier we are for everyone to find. So anyway, thank you very much, everyone, for putting us in your ears. And I'm Andy.
I'm Chandler.
And I'm Crystal.
And we will see you next time. Thanks a lot.